All right, I'm going to get us started. Thank you all so much for joining our second week of our War is Not Green campaign action weeks. Last week we had a beautiful kickoff webinar. We had an amazing calling party, and this week is no different. We have our webinar tonight. We have a working group session. We have another calling party to end the week. Stick around till the end, and you'll get all the details about that. But again, thank you so much for joining this week and every week of our action weeks. These weeks are designed to go deeper with each of our Code Pink campaigns, learn more about the people behind the movement and how our liberation work is connected to Palestine, to peace with China, and to peace with the planet. Exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. Again, if you missed any webinars, calling parties, or didn't grab some of our resources, look out for my name in the chat. I'll be adding all of our resources, all of our Code Pink actions throughout the night, and you'll receive absolutely everything. And like I said, stay till the end to receive all of the updates for our action weeks, and particularly for this week for War is Not Green. I'm going to go over the norms and then I'll pass it to Aaron to get us started. But for our norms, as is every virtual and some in-person actions, be respectful. This isn't a debate, but a discussion. We are not here to mediate arguments. We're here to learn from each other. Be kind, be curious, be ready to take action. And please, 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 if you could, for the entire portion, please stay muted. We record and we live stream these classes to use for future radio shows, future resources, and for people to watch from just not tonight. If they missed it tonight and they wanna watch it for years to come, we want to keep this preserved. So please, if you can stay muted the entire night, that would be great. I'm gonna pass it to Aaron to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, and I'm super excited for this and to hear everything from Patrick and Heba and talk a little bit about our campaign work. And so for anyone who's new, I'm Aaron. I'm CodePink's War is Not Green campaigner, and I also support our East Coast regional organizing. And for anyone who's new and this is your first time tuning in, I highly recommend going back to our webinar from last week to get a little bit more of the sense of the history and the analysis and the strategy of the War is Not Green campaign. But I'll give a little bit of an overview right now. And so this campaign really started at the inception of Code Pink, opposing the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, to show what really to anyone paying attention, I think, is a pretty obvious impact of the cost of war and of imperialism and of militarism, seeing the rise in diseases upon birth and the decimation of agriculture. We're, of course, seeing this in Gaza with the complete decimation of vegetation and the ecocide happening. But of course, after conversations around why this cost of war wasn't included in in studies and books and in the climate movement at large, there was a study from the Cost of War Project at Brown that identified the US military as the largest institutional polluter in the world, and the insane amount of emissions from the war on terror, quote unquote. And of course, this doesn't even begin to capture even the numbers of making it the largest institutional polluter in the world. It doesn't begin to capture the true scale and destruction and the emissions of manufacturing, of contracted shipping, of infrastructure accidents, toxic waste dumps, contamination from our over 800 foreign bases in over 80 countries, the contamination from those bases, the operations of NATO countries and others that buy US arms. And so, I mean, it's just unfathomable the more that you unravel all of this. And so this campaign is really a way to build movements because, despite so many environmental organizations centering their missions around protecting ecosystems, saving the planet, protecting life in all of its forms, which we're absolutely in support of, and it's why we do this, a lot actually haven't acknowledged war and militarism and imperialism as one of the largest threats to the planet. And we've, of course, seen, as I mentioned, horrific ecocide in Gaza over the past 2 years, with almost all the vegetation destroyed and agriculture not being able to happen likely for decades to come. We've seen the destruction of the Congo for decades since the buildup of of nuclear mining for uranium. Uh, we've seen the destruction of the Congo for mineral extraction, and now for so-called green technology. And we've seen what the centrality of war and this destabilization of governments globally does in maintaining the current extractive economy that has no concern for life in any form. And all of this amidst having one of the largest movements against militarism and against war in decades, that there's folks around the world shutting down ports and have been for Palestine, and the progress made and the place that Palestine has given the environmental movement in raising up all of this has been huge. And so we need a united front against militarism if we want to fight for the people on the planet. We're really up against a lot, fighting for the full liberation of Palestine, regardless of what happens for the ceasefire, but really, of course, hoping for safety and relief for the people of Gaza. We're fighting for an end to the militarization of Latin America and the Caribbean, especially now amongst increasing threats of war on Venezuela, stopping a potentially catastrophic war against China, calling for the US out of everywhere, out of Africa, out of Korea, out of Haiti, the Philippines, and lifting the sanctions that we've imposed globally that suffocate economies and preventing truly green and just transitions. And the climate movement really should be a natural ally into all of this. We can't end the climate crisis without cutting the Pentagon's operations and closing our over 800 bases that each is their own insane story of disaster and of lack of accountability, of taking sovereign land and continuing to advance global warfare. And so when we're building a movement against imperialism, there's really no way to illustrate it than talking about the extraction that the US military continues to impose throughout the world. And tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about how we're engaging the climate movement and the invitations that we've made. And we're going to be introducing our Elephant in the Room campaign, which talks about the cost of war and militarism as often the elephant in the room in climate spaces. And specifically, the Elephant in the Room campaign is reaching out to 12 organizations that raise around $4 billion a year that haven't actually acknowledged war and militarism and imperialism as one of the largest threats to the planet. And we're going to talk about this later, and starting with explaining our choice to start with an invitation to the Sierra Club. And we're going to hear from Patrick and from Heba, who are really leading the effort with two individual really incredible efforts that are connected amongst this global effort in responding to so many of this and giving an analysis of their experience with the climate movement and the projects that they're pursuing. But ultimately, this campaign is a campaign for survival and for life, and recognizing the interrelated nature of our struggle for liberation from imperialism, the war economy, capitalism, and the struggle for life on the planet. And it's a movement building tool that recognizes how our local and our global survival really depends on a united front against war and imperialism, which we see all over the world. And so I'm going to stop talking for now and pass it over to Patrick, who I'm so excited to introduce. Patrick is the research director of the Climate and Community Institute and the co-director of the Transition Security Project. His research and writing covers topics ranging from green industrial policy to the role of the Pentagon in the climate crisis to the international political economy of biodiversity loss. Prior to joining CCI, Patrick was a lecturer in economic geography at Lancaster University, where he won the Virginia Mamadou Award for outstanding research in political geography for his work on Pentagon greenhouse gas emissions. He has written extensively in academic journals, including Science and Nature, Ecology and Evolution, and in popular outlets including Dissent and The Nation. And I'm so excited for Patrick to talk about the Transition Security Project. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and for that gracious introduction. As Aaron said, my name is Patrick Bigger. I use he, him pronouns. I am located in Frederick, Maryland, about 40 miles west of DC. And I was so excited when Aaron asked me to talk about this new project that we are cooking up that really aims to be a piece of, you can think of it as movement infrastructure for the work that y'all are trying to do. And that project is the Transition Security Project, which is a collaborative research center on climate, the war economy, and geopolitics. So all of that sort of miasma of awful stuff that Aaron was talking about in his introduction, that's exactly the stuff that I've been working on professionally for more than 10 years now, and now we're bringing into this new research center. And it's always a joy to talk to folks who come primarily from the peace movement, since I got into this entire world organizing against the Iraq War in 2002, and now to see more and more folks from the peace movement come into the climate movement is really exciting, and I think it's really critical for a number of reasons that I will explain in this presentation. Just to give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from. Okay, the next slide. So I come from the Climate and Community Institute. We're a progressive climate and economy think tank. We really work to be the connective tissue between movements, academics, and policymakers in order to drive really ambitious, transformative climate policy that works for working people. The Transition Security Project is a collaboration with our friends at Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth, but the think tank Commonwealth in the UK, which is primarily focused on public ownership. And what we're trying to do is investigate the US and UK military industrial complexes, the sort of ways that they intersect with the economy, and most importantly, the threats that they pose to the climate transition. And to do this, we collaborate with unions, other researchers, and policymakers to develop alternatives for a climate safe and just future. And so in order to do that, we really focus on three key areas. So thinking about the politics and the economy of war industries, and particularly alternatives to war industries, that is what we could be making with our finite resources instead, that build a political economy of life rather than one of death. We look at war making and the climate crisis in both the US and UK, and then we look at the geopolitics of the climate transition. And so just in terms of the kinds of questions that we ask, you know, Key bono, this is a sort of classic thing that folks have done when they're looking at the war economy. IPS, the Institute for Policy Studies Cost of War Project, National Priorities Project is very good at this, as is Anita Crawford's Cost of War Project. But really getting more granular about that and thinking specifically about workers. We know that workers in the military industrial complex at the big five military manufacturing firms, and now in the tech startups like Palantir and Anduril, workers at these companies get a really bad deal compared to other workers in similar industries. CEO pay at a place like Raytheon is like 262 times the average factory worker there. And so, these are not good jobs to start with. And then, of course, the end result of what those jobs are making are not good either. And so we are working with unions, especially in the UK now, moving that work to the US, to look at military industrial conversion. So if we look at military manufacturing sites across the US, from Boeing in Seattle to Anduril in Ohio to Raytheon in Texas, what are the skills and tools available that could be used to make stuff that we actually need for the climate transition? We know that during the last period of defense spending reduction in the early 90s, Lockheed Martin actually made the first, or just Lockheed at the time, made the first hybrid bus. So we know that these things are possible, and we're going to work with unions to figure out how to do it. On the climate side, we have been collaborating for about 5 years now on military ecological damages. You've probably seen a lot of work on the greenhouse gas emissions of the US military. They're horrific. We also continue to do that work, showing that the $1 trillion Pentagon budget will add emissions to the Pentagon's already bloated emissions catalog, on par with a country like Croatia, right? So every additional $1 billion of Pentagon spending exacerbates the climate crisis in ways that you or I could not possibly hope to as individuals, right? This is a systemic structural problem that has to be confronted in that way. But even more than that, one of the main things that we think is missing in a lot of the analysis is not just the emission side, but the way that the Pentagon and the US commitment to militarism is slowing down the climate transition by, for example, capturing relatively scarce energy transition minerals, so the same suite of rare earth minerals that go into making bombs that get dropped on Palestinian children, those are actually the same stuff that you need to build offshore wind. And so we're trying to track how the Pentagon is stockpiling and hoarding these really important energy transition minerals. And then, of particular interest to y'all, I think, this is work that we've already been doing with CODEPINK and some of our other movement partners, where we're happy to provide research and briefings, on any question that you have. We've got a team of researchers who we can deploy to answer questions that y'all have that you think would be helpful in your organizing, and then doing the media work around that. And then geopolitically, I think we all feel like we're in a fairly unsettled geopolitical time. The U.S. has voluntarily entered into this new Cold War with China, threatening to annex Greenland for minerals, despite the fact that, Pete Hegseth said we're done with all that green crap. Yet for some reason, they still want access to critical minerals in Ukraine and in Congo and in Greenland. And so we'll be doing a lot of work on sort of sorting out what is going on in this geopolitical moment and what a response should be. And this is largely born out of a lot of my frustration, where I feel like progressives in the US are often very good. We sort of have a common set of policies that we want domestically, but we're really weak on foreign policy. And so trying to come up with the sort of key tenets of what a climate safe and just foreign policy would be for the US, this seems like a critical task that we should all be thinking about together. And if you want to learn more about the Transition Security Project, we'll be launching at 1 p.m. on October 16th. That's Thursday. You can find the link to register for that webinar at transitionsecurity.org. A number of other launch products that we've got coming out. But now to pivot just real quickly to how we intersect with the climate movement. Why we think that this is so important is because the climate movement, frankly, is pretty weak right now. In the wake of the IRA, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was not really what many people wanted unless you're a real molecule nerd. And so by extension, no one was really to stick their neck out for it. And so it's dead. We temporarily had this big climate investment. Now it's gone away. Now, where do we go from here? A lot of movement folks have moved to state and local fights, and we think that's good. But we've got to start building for the next kind of Green New Deal moment. We've got to start articulating the big positive vision of what we can have instead. And I don't think that we get there without really seriously contending with war and militarism. It doesn't make it any easier. Taking on climate and the military-industrial complex at the same time certainly adds a degree of difficulty. But it's hard to see how we get affordability for working people, how we ensure economic security, how we rebuild government capacity so that it can deliver massive green investments to transform the energy system. It's hard to see how you get to that without taking on and shrinking the Pentagon. So that is sort of where we're at, and that is how we intersect with where I think the climate movement is at right now. And I'm really excited to support CODEPINK and War is Not Green and building towards some of these shared objectives.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Patrick. And I'm really looking forward to the launch on Thursday. I'm definitely going to be tuning in and hope other people are as well. But just I think to ask one follow-up question, I think a lot of people sort of are aware that research happens or doesn't totally know, or might sort of see the results of it when it's published in a news outlet. But I think I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about sort of the process of how research is able to intersect with organizing and with this campaign work, and what you see sort of as different potential routes can be for sort of using the Transition Security Project with grassroots organizing and work to sort of move where the climate movement is and sort of what the impact of that could be.
I think a lot of what we're trying to do, both at Transition Security and at the Climate and Community Institute, where 85% of my work really lives, is we have a big problem in the United States that when people hear about climate policy, they think, oh, that's something for rich people. That's the way that the IRA worked, right? That was all tax credits that were super complicated, and you need to be a lawyer to understand how to access them to get solar panels in your house. Or it was like something for like the investment class, right? Because it was more of the same, right? And so we have got to be talking about climate and driving demand for climate policy that's climate policy you can touch, right? Good climate policy is the stuff that puts insulation in apartment buildings. It's stuff that puts a heat pump on a rural family's home so they can get off of nasty, you know, bunker fuel basically that they're using to heat their house that they have to have delivered, and it's hella expensive, right? So these are the sorts of ways that we have to be thinking about it, and we have to be supporting, I think that despite the climate movement being weak, I think that there's a lot of appetite for progressive solutions right now, right? We've seen that with Zoran's victory in the New York City primary. We see that with the ascendance of the guy who's going to run for the primary in Maine. We see this all over the country, but it's absolutely critical that we keep climate in those spaces. And so just in your organizing, in your daily, sort of conversations about, how hard it is to be a working person in this country right now, I think just not letting climate drop out of the conversation itself is a win right now. And then on the militarism side, I think that it's a challenge that, the party that is traditionally the party of peace has lost all credibility on that front. And so, we have to continue organizing, we have to continue showing up. And then, the research products that we produce are meant to sort of help y'all in your calls with legislators you work with, in your calls with other movements you intersect with, to be able to bring these data points, to be able to bring these talking points together to show how peace and climate justice are sort of inextricably interlinked.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we'll come back if there's time for some follow-up questions from the audience and between all of us. And so definitely put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them. And if we can't, we'll pass it on to all the panelists afterwards. But before we move on to our next guest, we just want to share a little bit more about the campaign that I was talking about earlier, especially because Heba from the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy is going to be sharing a little bit about her experience within the sort of big green organizations that I had mentioned. And so Jody is going to share a little bit about the insight into this campaign and talk a little bit about why campaigns matter and what we're sort of trying to do with all of them before I talk about some of the more of the details of all of it.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and thanks for leading this War is Not Green campaign. As you know, all the pieces that are moving the needle to engaging a much larger community in the call to end war, weapons, and the cost of militarism to the planet. Okay, so how do we affect change? Before we move forward, it's like always remembering, like, what is the strategy of what we're doing? So I know we look out at the madness and cannot fathom why people allow all the violence and stupidity to happen. We want it to end right now. I get it. I feel you. And yet the process of building this war economy, violent, destructive, culture that we live in, it's been built over many decades with lots of money, where it's eroding people's sense of themselves, their connection to the earth, separating us from each other, and being fed lies nonstop by our media. So to affect change, we have to take back the ground of the culture that the war economy has occupied. That takes education, inspiration, and ways to engage together. That, that all kind of happens in a circle that feeds itself and, continually feeds itself. But we have to show up to move the ball forward, one conversation at a time. Just telling people the truth, the facts, or exposing the violence and lies, it doesn't change and create the necessary changes in the culture that's holding together those lies. Being it and doing it daily does. So moving from passive to active, that's what we want to do with the people that aren't in the streets with us yet, but that are close. We call them the low-hanging fruit. They're close, but they need a nudge. They need more information and they need an invitation to engage. That's where we come in. We build that structure where they like, oh, I'm joining with others to make something meaningful happen. So that's what a campaign does. What we have done over the decades is move this message from like invisible in the movement, like not there, to the anti-war movement embracing it, articulating it, as we just heard. Lots of tools now available for all of us. So the anti-war movement, every group has a way that we can engage with us. Last month we had Climate Week, Peace and Climate Justice Week. That took a lot of work. That a lot of groups starting to understand a war is not green. We've moved the issue inside the room at COP from being invisible. But if we're going to build a movement that can actually make those in power uncomfortable and afraid, we now have to engage the low-hanging fruit in the climate movement, because they say they want to affect all those things that are creating the devastation and the climate chaos. But, this is the elephant in the room. This is a way to engage the climate movement and understanding that ending war is a climate solution. They have that word. So we have to help educate them. This year, Erin's been really successful in outreaching to the low-hanging fruit of groups, asking them to sign on to our statement, and has over 100 organizations. But now we need to bring it to the bigger ones who've not responded in the first 10 asks. And we can do that by engaging their grassroots members who do understand, or once told the facts, have an aha moment and want to do something. So I'll let Erin take us into the details, but it's always good to know where we are in the strategy of changing hearts and minds so we can isolate the violence and war and grow the community of those who are engaged in creating a world of peace and justice. And as we say at the local peace economy work, where we are creating conditions conducive for life. Turning it back to Erin for more specifics. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jody. And I think you really hit home in terms of what we're trying to build, which is just at the end of the day, it's not that complicated. That when we're going up against one of the most existential threats for everyone, and that is already taking shape around the world in places that have been decimated often by US foreign policy and hitting those who are the most impacted and the least sheltered first, it's critical that we don't ignore what could be some of the most effective routes for organizing, and that we also don't ignore a base that already exists that can join and can really build this united front. I think we talk all the time about sort of examples of united fronts, and we talked last week a lot about, for example, efforts in Vieques, in Red Hill, where there were cross-sector struggles that united against what was very clearly the threat of militarism that was decimating agricultural ecosystems, health. And you go to any example of a US base in the over 80 countries that they're in, and you see very clearly that it is a threat for the land, it's a threat for long-term health, and that the presence, whether it's in the moment of gunfire and bombs, or whether it's in the sanctions imposed in an economic warfare, and whether it's the long-term impact from invasions that still are everywhere and are very visible. And so I think we really need to be following the lead of these struggles in places that are the most impacted by war and militarism and imperialism. And so in building this movement, that's why we're putting forward this elephant in the room campaign, with the framing of the cost of war and militarism and imperialism being quite literally the elephant in the room in climate spaces. I don't know if anyone saw our photos in social media of us with a very big inflatable elephant saying that the US military is the #1 institutional polluter in the world at climate marches, and that's been something for years. But the campaign tries to sort of expand on all of that, and not just pollution, but the ways to join up, and the ways that green energy can't be possible without, understanding the mineral extraction that currently drives green energy that decimates lives everywhere, and that is only possible partially because of the rising pressure for war and the technologies that use these minerals. And so the campaign looks at 12 organizations that are some of the largest and some of the most well-funded and some of the most influential climate organizations in the country right now. We've specifically, we're looking at and inviting the Sierra Club, the Center for Biological Diversity, Earth Justice, Project Drawdown, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the National Audubon Society, the National Wildlife Federation, the Environmental Defense Fund, the World Wildlife Fund, the Wilderness Society, Conservation International, and the Nature Conservancy. And to be clear, we're not trying to paint all of these organizations with a broad stroke. Each one is very different, has its own histories, has different funding structures, has different membership bases, serves different interests, and is not necessarily all fighting for the same goals either. And so, but they are all organizations that in total raise around $4 billion in annual revenue. The climate movement overall is estimated to raise around $16 billion annually, whereas the anti-war movement alone is much less of that, around like 0.011% or something like that. And so it's a huge disparity, and this isn't just about money, but it's also about a really well-organized basis. The Sierra Club has around 4 million members around the country, and so many of them are already engaged in this, and a lot of the chapters are doing really incredible work. But at the same time, it's an organization that hasn't addressed the cost of war and militarism, of ecocide and genocide in Palestine, and Heba will talk a little bit more about her experience specifically, but there's sort of similar stories throughout where there might be bits and pieces of things addressed, but not necessarily the full picture. The Center for Biological Diversity, which is our target and our ask and our invitation after the Sierra Club, recently was part of creating a lawsuit against alligator Alcatraz in South Florida that took up indigenous land and threatens drinking water of so much of the population of Southern Florida. And they were very rightly calling out the ways in which alligator Alcatraz, which is, for anyone not familiar, a horrific immigration detention center, concentration camp that the Trump administration is developing with use of FEMA funds. And so calling out that intersection of domestic militarization is crucial, but we want to invite them to sort of elevate this analysis further. And so with each of these, it's about creating sort of a ripple effect for within the wider climate movement. We're starting with the Sierra Club because it's a very membership-driven organization in many ways and gets a lot of funds from members and has a lot of chapters that are sort of already organizing around this or have the consciousness there. But by inviting them first, we're able to give this broader education. And if we succeed, that can hopefully create a bit of a ripple effect, at least in it being something that is responded to in some way or another from them. And of course, ideally, there is sort of domino effects around philanthropy and around resources for all of these. And if not, it's about educating, like we're always trying to do, both the bases of all of these organizations that are already doing their own organizing and advocacy and the wider public, and educating about imperialism through all that in the process. And if it doesn't, it also clarifies the red lines that exist and that don't, and why philanthropy operates the way that it does, and the reasons that all these organizations make the decisions that they do, which is always crucial for understanding in times of increasing tension and when the contradictions heighten and when it's becoming clearer than ever to so much of the climate movement that we can't take on the climate crisis without taking on war and imperialism and militarism. Understanding where there is individuals and funding and organizing that might be dragging its feet a little bit in an overwhelmingly clarifying period of time where we really need to come together more than ever. And so, Jody, I don't know if you have anything more to add that I missed, but if not, okay, yeah, if not, I will pass it on to Heba, who I'm so excited to introduce, as Heba Kassam is a strategist and founder of Visionary Edge with over a decade of experience at the intersections of climate justice, industrial policy, trade, public health, human rights, and demilitarization. She has held leadership roles across national organizations and advises on climate, energy, and movement strategy. And so I'm so excited for you to talk more about your experiences and also about the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Huge shout out to the CODEPINK team for their new campaign and pulling this together. And of course, Patrick, who I've worked with over the last few years on different efforts. So I want to share a little bit about myself. Erin had mentioned that I used to work at Sierra Club. I think I have only talked publicly a couple of times, nothing super major, right? You've all seen what's in the media. Sierra Club has gone through many changes over the years. But before I talk about Sierra Club, I do want to talk just a little bit about my background and PICS and some of the great work that we have at PICS and some of our efforts in the US. So I'm Palestinian American. I'm the proud daughter of Palestinian refugees. My father was a UAW worker, and my mother actually organized her workplace as a teacher with AFT, which actually played a big part in how and why I ended up at Sierra Club and some of the work that I did there. So both my parents, their families were violently displaced in 1948, and so they grew up in a refugee camp, which was bombarded at different times. And so, like many immigrants, they eventually made their way to the US for better opportunities for jobs, better opportunities. It was a double-edged sword where we lived very close proximity to the factories that slowly killed some of our family members and caused a lot of health issues in our community. But we also needed those jobs, and the unions really helped us. So all of this is to say that, all of these things have really helped shape me and the work that I do. So I previously worked with the Big Greens. I used to work at Sierra Club, but I've worked across the board with a number of the Big Greens and a number of national groups. And so I'll talk about that. But for the last 2 years, I've been working with different organizations and campaigns on climate, environmental justice, industrial policy, human rights through my firm. And I currently serve as an advisor with the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy, also known as PICS. So I'm going to share a little bit about what PICS is, and I want to share specific things that we just recently put out in the last month, I want to say. So PICS is a global organization dedicated to advancing ecosumud, integrating ecological resilience and steadfastness with strategies to confront the challenges of ecocide, apartheid, and colonialism in Palestine. Rooted in indigenous knowledge and cultural values, PICS drives impactful local engagement in Palestine while building coalitions centering the Global South to advocate for climate justice and human rights. Through innovative research, movement building, and legal and policy advocacy, PICS empowers communities to sustain their connection to the land, resist systems of oppression, and promote a just transition for a liberated and sustainable future. So I can drop the website link in the chat. I also want to note that the founder and executive director of PICS is Mohammed Yusrif, who is a Palestinian from Gaza. He used to live in Gaza. And so a lot of the work out of PICS is actually rooted from his own personal experience and his upbringing. Okay, I dropped the link to the website. So recently, sorry, I have too many. Okay. So I want to talk about two recent publications from PICS. Right before Climate Week, in partnership with Tipping Point North-South, we released a briefing on military and conflict-related emissions and climate reparations for Palestine. To my knowledge, we have not ever put anything out like this, as a movement on Palestine. Maybe there has been some research here and there, but I don't think anyone's ever actually calculated the reparations, the climate reparations. And I'll drop the link for the briefing in the chat. But I want to share just some of the key findings. To date, the total estimated amount of the military and conflict-related climate reparations owed by Israel and its allies to the Palestinian people since the Nakba is upwards of $148 billion. Of this, Israel is responsible for about $103 billion. This is US dollars. The US is responsible for about $40.8 billion. And Israel's allies share further responsibility like Germany, France, UK. So Germany is about 2.7 billion, France is 1 billion, UK is half a billion, and Italy is about 0.17 billion. In addition to the briefing, we recently released our manifesto. It's called Recognize, Resist, Rebuild, a Manifesto for Palestinian Liberation and Ecological Justice. So the manifesto imagines a world where the struggle for climate justice is inseparable from ending genocide, ecocide, and apartheid. These crises are born from the same problem, a colonial system that continues to legitimize war, exploitation, and plundering our planet. So we're calling on everyone who fights for justice, whether it be ecological, social, or political, to resist. We must build something different. The manifesto puts forward a new vision of a just, rights-based collective future. I'll share the link to the manifesto also, but I just wanted to share a little bit more about how it's broken up in its 3 parts. Number 1 is recognize that oppression is interconnected. The root drivers of the climate crisis and genocide in Palestine are the same: colonialism, fossil capitalism, and militarism. Number 2, resist. We must act to transform our world for people on planet and resist colonialism and imperialism and the global fossil economy and greenwashing, including committing to BDS actors that are complicit in environmental destruction and colonial violence. And number 3, rebuild. We must rebuild a future that recognizes sovereign's right to development and the right to return, which is like huge for my family, right? They are still 4th-generation refugees who could not return to their homeland since 1948. The other thing I will share about PICS is it's a global organization and we have efforts in different parts of the world. Right now, there are a lot of efforts in organizing around COP. Some of our team members are getting ready for that. They're somewhere in Latin America. And we are starting a US node of PICS in collaboration with some of the great minds that you heard from today, including CODEPINK staff and Patrick and more. And so we'll have more coming out soon, and we'll be able to share more hopefully through CodePink and other efforts. Okay, so let's talk about the big greens. I previously worked at Sierra Club. I want to start by saying that although it was stressful, I genuinely loved the work that I did. I worked on the living economy team. I was a senior lobbyist and then became a director. And so we worked on basically the Green New Deal, economy-wide, sector-specific investments. We worked on industrial transformation. I truly loved the team that I worked with, and there are some incredible people who work at Sierra Club. And Aaron had mentioned the chapters, the volunteers. I would say majority of the people I interacted with, whether they were volunteers, chapter staff, national staff, like consultants, majority of them were like really aligned with like my values and cared about a lot of the things that Aaron had laid out. There were weird things that happened. So a few years ago when I was there, I randomly learned that Sierra Club did an annual trip to Israel. I believe that trip no longer happens now, but it did take a lot of organizing. So I'm bringing this up because it was a lot of organizing from Palestinian-led groups, environmental justice groups, and then a lot of internal organizing. So it was an external coalition that approached the Sierra Club, asking them to stop this trip. And then through that, we learned through the outings program that they also had other problematic trips. The focus for those meetings was that trip specifically. And you can just imagine the crazy things that we were told, like they would say things like, we don't do international stuff, and this is like a very specific kind of trip, even though there was an international campaign. They did go to COP every year. So like there were a lot of international efforts. And so it was basically we don't want to talk about anything about Palestine. We don't want to talk about colonialism. We don't want to talk about environmental justice, but they claim to care about it. And I do think genuinely, even some of the leadership, who some of them are no longer there, I do think they genuinely cared. But as an institution, there have been a lot of issues over the years, and I think a lot of them are still not resolved. Um, and like when I was there, our team did a lot of work to build with environmental justice organizations and with frontline communities, not to tokenize them, to genuinely build and work with them. I can't say the same for some of the other teams at Sierra Club, and some of which are people are still there. So there has been some progress that has been made, but there still needs to be a lot more done. And I think that environmental groups, the big greens in general, just don't understand that they can't advocate for the planet. Like you can't say that you are taking on the climate crisis while ignoring militarism and colonization and imperialism. Like you just can't. So that's all to say that I'm very excited about Code Pink's War is Not Green campaign and to work with them on our PICS focused effort in the US, which will include a lot of work around public awareness and grassroots organizing in partnership with folks across the country and different organizations. And a part of this work includes delegations to Palestine. So I organized the first delegation in April. So we took a group of climate justice activists and organizers and policy folks to Palestine. And so we're hoping to plan a few more, especially one in the coming months. The first one was mainly people who were like already down for climate justice, environmental justice. I think as we start building these campaigns out and working together, we're really hopeful that we will get some of the leadership of the big greens to commit to going and see firsthand what an apartheid state looks like and the impacts that it has on the environment and the planet. So I think I'm going to stop there. I'm excited to work with Code Pink, and I think I'll turn it back to you, Erin.
Thank you so much for that, Heather. And I'm so excited for the everything that I see from Pix. I'm just immediately like it blows my mind, and it's some of the most incredible work I've seen. I just one, I think, question to sort of start out that I'm thinking about is I think I'm wondering sort of where you see what the most like valuable ways that the climate movement and the movement that moving sort of the climate movement and doing some of this work can strengthen our movements for Palestine and against imperialism. Because I think some people might sort of hear everything that we're saying and around the Sierra Club and whatever else and sort of be like, well, we don't need to work with them. Like it's all sort of gone. And it might be the case for some of it, but I'm wondering sort of in your words, like what the value is sort of in trying to do this gargantuan project of trying to sort of more move this from the grassroots scale.
Yeah. Short answer is we all just witnessed a genocide for 2 years. So I think it's easy to like like no one can unsee or pretend to not know what just happened in the last 2 years. And we just can't ignore it, right? And I think that the grassroots efforts, like I said, about the example of the annual trip to Israel, the last time I checked with one of my former colleagues a few weeks ago, and my understanding is that trip is no longer happening. It was a very messy organizing process, right? They like said something, then they retracted, then they said again, like to the coalition, like, yes, we agree with you, we're not going to go on this trip. Then they retracted it. Eventually, that trip ended. So I do see the value in educating and pushing and organizing and including the grassroots, because that's the only way we're going to move things forward. And like using what's happening in Gaza right now, and it's not just Gaza, right? So like the West Bank has also been under attack and has been directly impacted with what's happening in Gaza as like collective punishment. So using Palestine specifically, and it's not just Palestine, right? Like we could talk about a number of countries where this is happening, like Sudan, and it's all tied to the fossil fuel industry. But I think I think there's more than just value in doing it. I really think we can win on these campaigns by having these hard conversations and then like forcing these conversations and pushing them in the right direction because it's so directly linked to the fossil fuel industry, and their biggest thing is we want to take on the fossil fuel industry. And so like we're actually aligned, right? We're all aligned on that. And I think that majority of people, at least when it comes to Palestine, like the world has shifted its views, and like people are now finally starting to see the truth. So we have a moment to at least use that to start pushing some of these environmental groups. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I do think there's a big opportunity, and I really do believe that we can win.
Absolutely. And I'll also say that you were part of a mini summit that we did a few weeks ago at the People's Forum that was incredible, that Heba gave incredible opening remarks for. And and that link can be shared in a sec. But one thing that we were sort of highlighting from that was all of the different sort of nodes that that collaborative work for two movements that are considered separate but really aren't at all and should never be even considered separate, can do sort of with ongoing campaigns that target certain things, whether it's Citibank or whether it's Maersk, the logistics company, or whether it's broader educational campaigns around the US out of Africa or out of our militarization of the hemisphere and the Americas, and or shows against military air shows. And so there's all of these nodes, I think, that all of this exists in, that where there can, I think, be some really generative work. I think, yeah, I'm also wondering if either of you, Patrick or Heba or Jody, have any questions for each other.
Well, I have a question for you before I dash off to another call. But how can the audience engage in both these campaigns we're talking about? And maybe start with, Patrick and Heba about how the audience could engage with you, and then Erin could finish off with ours. And thank you so much, both of you. I learned so much today. Thank you.
I would love it if y'all want to come along to the Transition Security launch on Thursday at 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific. That's transitionsecurity.org. You can register. And maybe if I could just take a quick whack at answering that last question a little bit. I think, especially when engaging with big greens, there are a lot of kind of big ideas floating around out there right now. One of them that sort of the big greens seem to be settling on is getting on board with the abundance agenda, which, if you haven't heard of that, I'm jealous of you. It's the kind of thing that Ezra Klein and his ilk are spinning up that is a sort of unholy alliance, I think, of, big tech, big energy, big capital to sort of create this world of never-ending accumulation and consumption. And I think that if that's the only game in town, then that's the one that the big greens are going to sign on to because they see that as their sort of route to power. And I think by talking about militarism, it's a really good explanation of what Naomi Klein talked about in her book, This Changes Everything, right? That like climate change really is a sort of huge systemic problem and that all these things have to be addressed simultaneously. You don't get to climate justice by sort of tinkering at the edges. You really have to have a transformative vision. And so a transformative vision that includes peace, that includes demilitarization, that includes Palestinian self-determination and liberation. These are all sort of checkpoints on the path to climate justice because there's climate justice everywhere, there's climate justice nowhere. And so bringing these, I think intuitive, but sometimes uncomfortable truths to our friends at the NRDCs of the world is incredibly important.
I don't even know. I don't know how to follow up after that. Thanks, Patrick. I agree. I co-sign what Patrick said. Ways that you can plug in with us, though. Also, I want to name that I am a fellow with the Transition Security Project. I'm really excited about that too. So you should go Thursday to their launch event. I think it's Thursday, right, Patrick? Oh, I don't get the date wrong. Yep, Thursday. check out pics, check out our social media. We are on Instagram. It should have the name. And yeah, we will share more through there. Thank you, Grace. I appreciate you so much for dropping all of the links. Yeah, check out our work, and then we will be posting things hopefully soon, either through pics and or through some of the Code Pink Wars Not Green campaign on some of the efforts and things that we'll be doing in the US. We have just started the US PICS work and still trying to figure it out, but you will see us at different conferences, events. We'll have things we'll share things on social media, and we will definitely be posting about our delegations before or after, and give updates on sort of the success that we're having.
Aaron,
Awesome.
this is Barbara Harrison. I just want to add to what you're saying about climate change. I think it's critical that we take a more Native American approach, like Robin Wall Kimmerer in braiding sweetgrass. We need to see ourselves as part of the earth, not above the earth. And this is
For
a
sure.
very European fault.
Thank you, Barbara. Please put your thoughts in the chat before unmuting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, and I will say I recommend everyone check out the work of some organizations doing some incredible work, Indigenous-led organizations. The NDN Collective, the Red Nation published a book called The Red Deal a few years ago that I really appreciate and I think is a great reading recommendation. But yeah, to get more involved with the Elephant in the Room campaign, there's a few things that you can do. One is signing on to our open letter, Environmentalists Unite, War Fuels the Climate Crisis. There's around 100 organizations signed on there already, and it's a very like bare bones bottom bar of what is needed, of just recognizing the scale and the cost and calling attention to it. But there's a very large cross section of organizations that have signed on to it that we're trying to build more as a media strategy and as a way to convene people more in an organized network around this. And so if you're part of a climate organization or a frontline organization or another organization, I highly encourage that organization to sign on. You can also reach out to local organizations, local chapters of any of the 12 organizations listed, the Sierra Club, especially if you're a member and or involved in some way. You can also sign on to our open letter to the Sierra Club that we're going to be delivering to their national office on Thursday. And as well as checking the box in there if you are affiliated with the Sierra Club in some way, so that we can sort of talk more and get organized more around pushing and inviting and all of this. We also tomorrow are going to have a War is Not Green working group call for anyone who wants to engage further in all of this and the strategy and take action more, in addition to a calling party on Friday. I will not be able to come to the working group call tomorrow. I normally am, but Jody will be running it and inviting everyone who is new, but we're working on sort of figuring out the strategy for this campaign more, and everyone is invited. And lastly, yeah, definitely reach out to me if you want any suggestions or tips on reaching out to these organizations, environmental organizations that you're affiliated with, the Sierra Club. We did just put together a fact sheet that has some talking points on all of this, and we're working on continuously developing that and talking with everyone about that. But, and I will put that link in the chat. But those are a bunch of ways we're continuously developing this campaign and moving sort of around with the pace that we're inviting all these organizations, but invite you to join us in figuring out that process. And definitely if there's only one thing that you get out of this, talk to local organizations with everything that you have learned here and all the resources that we've put together and that PICS has put together and that the Transition Security Project and Climate and Community Institute has put together, and share why it's necessary. And I think start having some of those conversations. If you're in an organized group, find ways to invite some organizations and see what they say, and invite opportunities to collab. There's so many. And you can find out about also joining local CODEPINK chapters that are doing this as well on our website. But thank you all so much. Once again, check out PIX, check out the Transition Security Project, and the launch on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, if I'm not mistaken. And I will see you all very soon.